Okay, Postcard from a Travel Snob is a poem by Sophie Hannah written in 1996, the mid-90s. And to understand it, firstly, I think we all know what a postcard is. I think we all know what travel is, but snob, that's something that some people might find a little bit tricky. So, what do we mean by snob? Snob is essentially somebody who has certain ideas kind of linked with the middle class, the upper class. They're kind of an idea of being superior because they belong to a particular cultural group. So somebody who might be a snob would be somebody who would possibly shop in Waitrose and think down on somebody because they're shopping in Tesco's. Or they might be somebody who goes clothes shopping in somewhere like Gucci, and then they might look down badly on somebody who would shop in Primark, for example. So that's the kind of thing that we think of when we think of a snob. So a travel snob would be something where we'd look at it through the prism of travel. Okay. So firstly, let's have a quick look at what the context is of where this snobbishness is coming from. In the 1990s, this poem was written in 96, more and more middle class people started to go on a gap year. This is particularly young people, but also some older people as well. They would discover something about themselves, something spiritual, something new and interesting, and it's basically a way for people to pay quite a substantial bit of money and time to make themselves interesting, which they could probably do by just being interesting first anyway. And I suppose Sophie Hannah agrees with that, and that's what the kind of comment that she's making about people who look down on others because they're not having such an interesting time. Films at the time would be 1998's The Beach, which is about a group of people who decide that they're going to go in this hideaway island in the middle of the South Pacific that no one can find, and actually and they kind of feel superior because they've done that. Eat, Pray, Love, which was a book and is also a film starring Julia Roberts, which is about somebody who feels they need to escape the rat race, escape the problems of everyday living to find themselves in a spiritual renewing in places like India and Italy. Problem is, everybody else in the real world, the normals, have decided that actually they would like to make the most of cheap air travel and cheap package holidays. And with globalisation occurring in the 80s and 90s, people who maybe generations before would never have even dreamt of being able to leave the country to be able to visit other countries and to be able to have new experiences. But a lot of the time those experiences become part of the same thing that they would experience on the traditional British seaside holiday, but they decided to export that abroad. So you get places like Benidorm, Ibiza, and Corfu that become massive areas for package holidays where people can go there, they can go on a cheap holiday, and basically they can live the British lifestyle, but they do so in a warmer country during the summer. And that's basically it. And examples of that would be from the working classes. So those people who we looked at the slide before would be snobbish, could be snobbish, and look down upon people who were more associated in these affordable package holidays. So kind of think Ryanair rather than Qatar or British Airways. Okay? Examples could include the Benidorm TV series that was really popular in the 2000s, and the In-Betweeners, which is really popular in the 2000s as well. So really cheap, really affordable, basically for students and people who are a little bit poorer. Okay? So what on earth has that got to do with our poem? Actually quite a lot, because Sophie Hannah is here to talks about in this poem, written in 1996, Postcard from a Travel Snob. She's kind of creating this kind of caricature. It's kind of a kind of a funny character for people to point and laugh at, that she probably experienced on her travels when she was in her teens and 20s travelling around the world. Okay, so firstly let's start off. As you can see here, I do not wish that anyone were here. This is an inversion of what would be a typical postcard greeting. It sounds quite mean, it sounds like they don't really want to be friendly and out there, which is what you usually get from a British postcard, wish you were here. What I've got here in red as you can notice here, with do not and this place is not. You're going to see this coming up quite a lot. This is something where it's just using inversion, but using negative language to describe how this person can only describe themselves by everything that they are not. And I think Sophie Hannah is sending this up. She's making a joke about this to show that this person is kind of vacuous, kind of doesn't really have much substance to them, and they're just describing everything that they're not rather than who they actually are. So this place is not a holiday resort with karaoke nights and pints of beer. That's the kind of thing that people would do when they're young, when they're poor, or when they're working class. They do that abroad. Okay. For drunken tourist types, you can hear the harsh alliteration. This person is almost spitting. It's almost venomous. She's so snobbish. She's so looking down upon these people because of the choices they make on their holidays. And then perish the thought. This is a very strong use of a middle class vernacular to show that this is a class thing that's going on. Okay? This whole alliteration continues with the P this time. Also, if you listen to it, this is a peaceful place. You can hear them also spitting those first letters out. This is quite ironic, as her views are anything but peaceful. She's somebody who is obsessed with trying to create division, and that's something that's not going to create something peaceful, because how can you relax if you're constantly looking over your shoulder trying to be better than other people? Untouched by man, again this negative language with not and hell and not continues throughout the poem. It's untouched by man. Is that necessarily a good thing that it's untouched by man? Maybe it's because people don't actually want to be there, and that's part of the irony which is to do with this, which is continued with I'm sleeping in a local farmer's van. It's great. Probably isn't that great. Here's an example of irony where the poet is saying, actually, can you imagine sleeping in a local farmer's van? It's probably not that fantastic. But this is the kind of things that people do. They're talking about how having unusual choices for holidays is something that will necessarily equal a great holiday. But is it really about enjoying it at the time, or is it about showing off to other people later about how original and interesting you are? Untouched by man, not like your seaside town consumer hell. So what you're seeing here is this conflation, this combination of the seaside town linked in with the idea of it being to do with consumerism, about paying money for whatever it might be, and to do with the idea that that is hell for them. Okay, all linked together. But frankly, she's probably paid over the odds to be in that local farmer's van in the first place, so she's a little bit of a hypocrite. This enjambment also that continues with makes it's great sound even less convincing. That's something that it stands out because of the enjambment, because the sentence is not completed. We have the it's great afterwards, which is almost kind of an aside. It's almost like they don't really believe what they're saying. We're going to continue to the next stanza, but we start off with there's not a guest house or hotel within 100 miles. Does that sound like something fantastic? Usually you'd be quite worried if you were 100 miles from anywhere that you could call civilization, where you could actually relax a little bit, because surely that's what people go on holiday, they try to relax. There's a use of hyperbole with 100 miles. It's probably not 100 miles if we're being completely honest, but it's something that is kind of exaggerating how this person is and you can imagine them talking to somebody else and showing off about how great and interesting and original they are. Again, the use of enjambment, like with the it's great in the stanza before, this is about enhancing, making the comedic effect even stronger. Again, the negative language continues with nobody and not. Nobody speaks English apart from me. Oh, well done you for speaking English. Over 1 billion people can speak English across the world, so it's not exactly an incredible thing that she should applaud herself for. And rest assured, I'm not your son and sangria 2-week small-minded packish Philistine abroad. You can even hear in my voice how much of that has been spurted out. It's almost as if she's spitting out all of those S's and those T's and those P's again. Also, notice the use of the compound noun. Again, this is pretentious language, the kind of thing that you would read in something like The Guardian or maybe The Independent. Something that's very self-conscious about what is fashionable and what isn't. They're all jumbled together, and it's basically making the idea that where you go on holiday defines what kind of person you are, which is an inherently ridiculous concept. And if you look here, there are the examples which I put up here of what is sangria, what is philistine, what's 2 weeks package. And from that, I'm going to let you work out what's going on in the compound. Now we finally get round to the final stanza, which is probably the most interesting one. When you're as multicultural as me, well, hang about. Multicultural is about your mixed identity. She's just on holiday. Where do you get that from? The idea that where you go on holiday means that you can understand what it's like to be someone from a multiracial background, or somebody who might be married to somebody from another country. It's completely absurd, and frankly, if I met that person at a party, I would be pretty bored by what they were saying. Your friends become wine connoisseurs, not drunks. Now, a wine connoisseur, actually, connoisseur, it comes from the French, which means to know. Okay, and this person is always constantly talking about how much they know and how much other people don't know, which is also about snobbishness towards people who are maybe more ignorant or more working class, or just don't want to be doing the same strange, weird things that she's obsessed with doing on holiday. Wine connoisseur is someone who knows a lot about wine. But frankly, wine connoisseur, not drunk. What actually is the difference of somebody who has a bottle of wine because they're a wine connoisseur and somebody who has a bottle of wine because they're drunk, or maybe 3 or 4 pints of beer? What's the difference in the end when they're ultimately drunk at the end? And then we continue with the negative language of not and not. I'm not a British tourist in the sea. Okay, so what are you? I am an anthropologist in trunks. This is completely absurd. An anthropologist is somebody who studies other people, which also gives her a sense of superiority because she's somebody who's outside her own culture, which is actually an impossibility. You can't really be completely outside your own culture and study it from afar when you're part of it yourself. Can you tell that this person, with this image of an anthropologist in trunks, can you tell that they're an anthropologist? Well, of course you can't. You're just going to assume that she's the same as everybody else. So ultimately, if it comes down to appearances, which is what this person is obsessed with, if you're actually viewing this person in the photos of their holiday, you're not going to have any idea whatsoever about whether they're an anthropologist or somebody who's, I don't know, just on holiday normally. Okay. So these are some things that you can think about as you go through, thinking about patterns that you can spot all the way through. The positive versus the negative language. Mostly there's quite a lot of negative language in here, which is something to show you, how she feels. She's always explaining about what the things that she isn't rather than the things that she is. We also have the use of nouns that are peppered all the way through, like wine connoisseurs and drunks, which we've previously discussed. It's a monologue. It's told from one particular person's point of view. That would be the form of the poem. It's also talking about, there's also a lot of contrasts going on between British tourists in the sea, anthropologists in trunks. Again, it's about showing what you aren't rather than really showing what you are, which means that you're obsessed with creating divisions between you and others. Again, with the middle class vernacular, that's about class and division. Compound phrases are about it being pretentious and trying to show how clever and sophisticated and intelligent you are, but ultimately it just makes you sound a little bit pretentious and arrogant. And then we also have the use of the rhyme scheme itself is A B A B all the way through, okay, and that shows it's someone who's kind of using quite a simplistic rhyme scheme. They're not actually that sophisticated themselves. It's not like it's in the form of a VNL or a sonnet. It's not that hard to write a poem like this, which kind of like would be a simple message, just like a postcard would be, which kind of shows that she's not really different from anybody else. She's writing something as simple as everybody else would. Okay, and I suppose. That's as far as I can get to there. Maybe you can have a quick look at what each stanza serves and what purpose that it has. But in the end, it's just following that very simple structure, just like a normal postcard would. Okay. Here's a great example here of a pearl that you could use. If you wanted to, you can have a good look at that, pause it and read it, and just maybe spot to see where the point is, where the evidence is, where's the analysis, where's the reader response, and how does it link to context. And then we can also look at a link sentence, which could be there also.